Welcome to the By Design radio program. My name is Dr. James Proodian of Proodian Healthcare and ProodianHealthcare.com, where health literacy is the key to longevity. And as long as God has us on this side of eternity, my show is designed to help educate you and your families to feel better, function better, and live as many quality disease-free years as possible. Thanks for joining me this week, and I hope everyone had a blessed week and is enjoying their summer. As with all of my shows, Luke 1:37, for with God nothing is impossible. I use that Bible verse to basically illustrate that if we as us mortal human beings take God's word and utilize his design by him, then we can implement into our life changes to help us feel better, function better, and live many quality disease-free years, not living a man-made lifestyle, but focusing on God's intention for our design. He designed us. We're made up of trillions of cells, and we're required to eat, we're required to move, and we're required to think every day of our lives. So the physical, the nutritional, and the psychological is what we take apart each week and looking at his design as it pertains to our individual bio-individuality. What that means is each one of us is designed differently. Yes, we're all made up of heads and arms, and we have a spleen and a heart, but how we function has to do with so much of our background, meaning our genetic history, our environment, and our lifestyle. So living a wellness lifestyle each day of our life, thinking about the physical, the nutritional, and the psychological, by following God's design, will help us improve and to transform. So this past, about 10 weeks or so, we've been taking apart Dr. Amen's book, Change Your Brain, Change Your Body, and we've learned about this 3-pound structure between our ears called the human brain. It is the biggest miracle in the universe. That's correct. The biggest miracle in the universe is the human brain. There is nothing designed anywhere near as intricate and as miraculously as the human brain. And we've been taking apart Dr. Amen's book, which basically illustrates what man has done to our environment, which has changed brain function, which has brought on to our society a host of illness such as Alzheimer's disease and dementia, the way we think, the way we process. And over the last bunch of weeks, we've been talking about how sleep interferes with brain activity and how getting good quality sleep is essential. We've talked about inflammation and hormones that our brains require for optimal potential. And that's what the show's about. It's about how do we live an optimal lifestyle so that we're utilizing God's plan, which was to create us, and take his model to optimize our health. And by design, has a ministry, which means that I speak at church groups. So if you're part of a Christian organization that would like me to come out and do a 90-minute program, we do this as a nonprofit. We raise money for Solutions Pregnancy Centers and other Christian organizations throughout the state. So I'd be happy to do that for you. I could be reached at ProodianHealthcare.com. So as we dive into this week's show, we're going to be talking about memory. So we're coming off a number of shows, and you could go to my YouTube channel if you want to catch up. The show is always about education, using what the science behind God's design has enabled us to be. And with looking at the chronic illness epidemic that is plaguing the world right now, from depression to type 2 diabetes to obesity, high blood pressure, heart disease, cancer, so much of the last 10, 20 years of research has illustrated that man's lifestyle has actually created the majority of this chronic illness. And the chronic illness is 70 to 80% of our healthcare cost. So from a public health perspective, we have massive epidemics going on, and looking at the cost associated with this chronic illness requires us, that's you and I, to become better informed, more literate, to make better changes in our life, because these shows are about change, making transformation, and creating real expectations in ourselves. So as we dive into Change Your Brain, Change Your Body, these shows are about making change, which means it requires us to every day make better choices in our wellness lifestyle and to honor God. So the memory solution, let's take a look at what Dr. Amen has to say this week in looking at a healthy body requiring a good memory. You need to remember that what you do every day to keep yourself healthy is not to forget, okay? Forgetting is not part of being healthy. So it's different. This is different from willpower, for instance, where urges and cravings overtake that prefrontal cortex. So that, remember we talked about the parts of the brain. One of them was that prefrontal cortex. It's the front part of your brain. So memory is basically being able to hold a plan in your mind so that you could consistently pursue your goals to make them happen. So you have to have the plan. I like writing things down in bullet points and looking at it, maybe daily or weekly. So I'm reminding myself and I'm building a long-term memory, which we're going to be talking about today. So memory requires focus to get the information into your brain, and then the information needs to get into the brain's long-term memory storage. So that's where we want to go. In our brains, there's these compartments. One compartment is long-term memory storage. And we have things stuck in those bins, if you will. And we want to take information and put it into the long-term memory bin. So this way we can improve our memory, improve the overall health of our brain, and improve the way our bodies are functioning. So there's 3 types of memory that Dr. Inman talks about. The first is called working memory. And working memory is in what's called the frontal lobe, and it lasts for like less than a minute. So this is the form of memory. It's commonly referred to as your attention span. And it lasts up to about a minute before it's actually erased. So like trying to memorize a dance step that someone just showed you is an example of working memory. Now, the next type of memory, number 2, is short-term memory. And this resides on the temporal lobes of your brain, something called the hippocampus, and it lasts for a few minutes to upwards of a few weeks before it's erased. Again, short-term memory. So when you try to recall the dance step you learned in last week's dance class, okay, these parts of your brain are activated, okay, so it's short-term memory. So not all of your movement-to-movement experience activates short-term memory, only those experiences that are novel, that are interesting, that you intended to remember will stimulate the nerves in this short-term memory. Okay, so now the first one, the working memory, then we have the short-term memory, and then we have the long-term memory. And these guys last a lifetime. So scientists, they're not really able to isolate what part of the brain long-term memory resides in, although it looks as though it's scattered throughout the entire brain. Okay, various neurons, various parts of the brain gather up this long-term memory. So when you try to recall the name of your first dance teacher when you were a child, that's accessing the long-term memory. So we could all use examples of our lives of a working memory or that, attention span. What the short-term memory is, and many people will say, I don't have memory, I lost my short-term memory. I hear that a lot amongst my 40 and 50-year-olds. And so we want to go back into something he calls memory boot camp. And we want to, in order to have the best memory possible, we need to keep your brain and your body healthy. And that makes sense, right? And you don't really need me to tell you that. If it was my liver, right, I'd want to keep my liver as healthy as possible. When we talked about detoxification in some earlier shows, we talked about how the liver is the essential organ of toxification. Well, your brain is the organ for memory, right? So here we want to keep it as healthy as possible, and your brain has requirements. It's not just sitting up there between your ears and a body part that you don't have to maintain. So we want to activate the brain as much as possible, and we want to treat it if necessary. So the brain is kind of like a muscle. The more you use it, the more you could continue to use it, and that's what's important. Learning, new learning. So the more that you learn throughout your life makes new connections in the brain. It makes your brain sharper and more efficient. So at no point of your life should you ever stop learning. Should you ever stop doing exercises for your brain? The brain constantly needs new streams of challenges. It needs new adventures. It needs new places to travel to. It needs new skills that you try. If you're feeling well and you want to go try tennis, or you pick up a new hobby, these are all things that are going to stimulate the brain. Like we talked about table tennis being a great activity. That's the way God designed us. Okay, so this isn't like James Proodian telling you This is my opinion about the brain. This is God's design. He gave us this structure so that we were constantly learning, constantly stimulating it with new exercises and new reading and new adventures. So that's the very design. Because the first thing that you want to do is, if you're having some memory problems, we don't want to just fluff them off. We don't want to, sweep them under the carpet. Let's first start, like we talked about last show, getting some blood testing, and you want to look for things such as a low thyroid output, that's hypothyroidism, vitamin B12 deficiencies, and how that ties into memory is very, very important. If you're taking medication like Xanax or Oxycontin, these things could definitely tie into memory abnormalities. Brain illnesses such as depression or ADD. Okay, stress hormones, and I don't know how many weeks we've done on stress hormones. They are found to kill the actual brain cells of the hippocampus. Lack of sleep or sleep apnea, very, very important for memory problems. Environmental toxins, and drug and alcohol abuse, which hopefully by now, I don't need to tell an educated audience that drug and alcohol abuse, or using drugs and using alcohol, has a direct impairment to brain tissue. Very, very susceptible, and I'm the first one, out there saying that marijuana use is absolutely something that should not be used, especially when I see what's coming across our country with the acceptance of marijuana, and once again, especially in our young children, those teenage years. It directly impacts brain function. All right, so God designed the brain a certain way. It runs every system in our body, and we want to look at evaluating the brain if we're first want to embark on changing our brain. We want to go to our doctor. We want to get blood testing such as liver function, homocysteine, which is an amino acid, very important amino acid to get tested on your blood, vitamin D, which you hear me speak about frequently, thyroid testing. You want to look at testosterone in males, and you also want to look at something called estradiol in females after menopause. It's spelled estradiol. Okay, so females after menopause is estradiol. You want to look at lipids, which are fats, blood glucose, okay, very important, vitamin B12, folic acid, and CBC. Remember, you could always email me about any questions you have. If I rattle off blood tests, I'll be happy to send them to you in an email fashion, okay? So Dr. MN did something interesting. He looked at over 55,000 brain scans, and he was talking about it in his book, and there's absolutely no doubt in his mind that the lights, and he had it basically dim as we age. So we have to actively work to keep our brains healthy. I hear people all the time, they tell me what great shape they were in their 20s, and now they're in their 50s, and they're 80, 100 pounds overweight. Right, the human body requires work. God designed us physically, nutritionally, and psychologically, and gave us this creation. He didn't say, here, do nothing. He said, here, now it's your job to maintain it. It's your job to know some of the physiology and biochemistry of the human body, so that instead of following this man-made design of stress, horrible foods that man has invented, Frankenfood, if you will, and I recently blogged about the fact that sitting is the new smoking. An inactive lifestyle is not what God's plan was for us. It might be man's plan, but it certainly wasn't God's. So by these brain scans, we understand that less blood flow that brings oxygen and glucose to nourish the brain, and it takes away waste products. And the fewer antioxidants for protection in the brain basically allow our brains to age faster. So we want blood flow that brings oxygen, and we need healthy glucose because we have to remove those waste products as well. Exercise is a key component to doing that, along with healthy nutrition. So we want to keep our brains healthy for as long as possible. So the very hardware of our brain is dependent upon our focus. It's dependent upon me and you every day doing the things that God planned us to do to build healthier bodies and living that wellness lifestyle. Now, throughout our day and throughout our years, we're up against things like genetic predisposition, alcohol and drug abuse, again, horrible for brain tissue, cancer and cancer treatments, cardiovascular disease and its impact of brain aging and increasing brain aging, depression and its impact of brain chemistry and brain aging, Most people don't realize diabetes, type 2 diabetes especially, with its impact of glucose and the imbalance of glucose and its impact of brain deterioration. Very, very critical. It's one of the most commonly overlooked things with diabetics that's not spoken about, is how diabetes affects our memory and affects brain function. Something I mentioned before, homocysteine, which I would say get measured on blood test. Also the hormones, testosterone, sleep apnea, smoking. These are all things that we want to do to enhance memory. Things like ginkgo are wonderful for brain. Phosphatidylserine, it's entitled PS, is also very, very good for brain chemistry. So if we're going to improve the memory, short-term, long-term, we want to look at the diet, we want to look at our sleep, and we want to look at exercise. Going back to the very things that God designed for us, that our parents told us every day, eat right and exercise, and knowing how our bodies are designed to allow our memory, short-term and long-term, as even the kind of memory where you're interacting with people daily, you could improve that. Just like you could improve your body by going to the gym, you could improve your memory by training your brain. Thank you for listening to me, Dr. James Proodian, for this week's episode of the By Design radio program. If you'd like more information about me, please go to ProodianHealthcare.com and submit any questions. And remember, guys, those earlier shows on inflammation affecting brain chemistry, stress and how hormonal stress affects our brain chemistry, getting good quality sleep, and stop living a sedentary lifestyle. Remember, sitting is the new smoking. Thanks and God bless. Have a great week.